What makes a person go knowingly to the cross? What makes a person ready to give himself for a cause, ready to give himself for others? We ask these questions today of Jesus as he shows he knows what awaits him in Jerusalem. We've heard this story of Jesus many times. He's on his way to Jerusalem, as he says, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. And he knows what happens when he gets there. But notice, what could possibly make a person go knowingly to the cross? On the one hand, I suppose we have to admit that this is a great mystery, and we'll never get to the bottom of why Jesus could do what he did, why he did do what he did. On the other hand, one word comes awfully close, and that word is love. Jerusalem, oh Jerusalem, says Jesus, how often have I desired to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her brood under her wings. Love. Love. Jesus had some things to say about why he was doing what he was doing, and we hear some today. We know Jesus, especially in his parables, but in other words and teachings as well, he had this amazing way of speaking about the mysteries of God in ways that common people could understand, using everyday images to speak about eternal truths. You may have noticed in today's gospel that Jesus speaks of two kinds of animals, the fox and the hen. He calls Herod a fox. In Jesus' day, there was no way that could be taken as a compliment. We have some folk tales today where the fox is at least cunning and clever. I think you and I, if we see a fox, across the road or something, we think, what a beautiful animal. Well, to a first century farmer, foxes were just trouble. They would have thought of foxes mostly as destructive. And Herod was certainly a destructive man. He didn't seem to know what to do with his power, and he had no sense of restraint. He had John the Baptist imprisoned, you'll recall, and then killed. The historians of his day agree he was a destructive man. To call Herod a fox was to say he was a menace. Probably any farmer knew just what Jesus was saying about Herod. It reminds me of an incident I recall from growing up. My friend lived on an acreage, and for several years, he and his family would buy about 100 newborn chicks, and you've seen these maybe at the feed store, right? When you can buy those newborn chicks, and they'd feed them out to maturity, and then some they would eat themselves or give to friends, or I think some maybe they would sell. One year, my friend was going to be in charge of feeding them. This was his project. And he fed them that first day, and the first night, and when he came back in the morning, most of them were gone. I happen to remember 76 of the 100 were gone. He counted only 24 left. We talked about it at school. We couldn't figure out who the killer could be. Something small enough to get into this enclosure, but able to eat 76 of these chicks? It didn't make sense. But then my friend found the chicks dead, but very few had been eaten. The rest were stashed between two panels in a wall of the enclosure, as if being saved for later. I understand this is typical of a weasel. It seemed like wanton destruction to us. The weasel just goes crazy, it seems. It takes far more than it needs. It just can't stop itself. No restraint. The next night, my friend set traps, but the weasel came again. Not to get the ones he'd stashed away, but took 12 or so more. The next night, he was down to one chick. Could not catch that weasel. Why it left the one, who knows? And why it never came back for the ones it had killed needlessly. I have to wonder, though, what if a hen was there? What if a hen had been there watching over those chicks? I don't think of a hen as a particularly powerful or fierce creature, but I wonder if that weasel would have done such damage, or if it would have come back if there'd been a hen's beak and claws to be reckoned with. We aren't taught to think of a hen as a noble animal, but when it comes to sheltering and defending her chicks, perhaps that judgment should be reevaluated. When a mother bird risks her own life for her offspring, I hesitate to call that love, but what should we call it? I can remember vividly one run-in with the fierce love of a mother bird. One spring, several years ago, Marie and I were out hiking on a prairie preserve, and as we did, we noticed several wooden birdhouses had been put out by the naturalists for the here and there for the native bluebirds to nest in. They were trying to reestablish that population. And at one point, we came to a T in the trail, and there was a little kiosk with a map, so we stopped to figure out where to go next. And as we looked at the map, I heard what sounded like a tiny, high-pitched scream, and then I saw something rocket by within a foot of my face. And as I looked around, I saw a bluebird flying 50 or more feet in the air, ready to take another dive-bombing pass, screaming the whole way like a bullet, nosedive right at me, pulling up at the last second, only to scream back up into the sky high enough to dive again. Now, bluebirds are tiny, and I would not normally describe them as scary, but this one was bold. And of course, I do not speak bluebird, but I got the message that this one was mad and behaving erratically enough to be quite unnerving. So something in me said, who cares about this map and directions? I just ducked my head and took off down the trail. Here's this little, as we look back, we could see the problem. Someone had put one of those bluebird houses on the back of the map kiosk. Don't do that. You will save a lot of stress on the birds and on the hikers. She thought we were invading her home. And it didn't matter that we were about 1,000 times her size or more. She was going to try to drive us off, and she did. A couple of simple stories about animals, but could we be getting near to what Jesus was talking about? Herod, a fox causing senseless destruction and misery in the world. Jesus, a hen who seeks to gather even the wayward and unwilling chicks under her wings of protection. We know about foxes in our lives, don't we? Sometimes they have names like Herod. We could name names today. Sometimes they don't have names we can name, but we know about the threatening dangers, the senseless destroyers, the causes of misery and fear. We know about the foxes in this world. And that's why we need to know about the hen. Maybe you've experienced this on a trail or even on a country road or in a park. You see a bird limping along, hopping on one foot. Or maybe running along the ground but unable to fly due to a wing tucked behind its back. You would think it was just a bird that had had an unfortunate accident, except wounded as it may be, it always seems to be fast enough to keep just out of your reach. And it keeps stopping and looking back at you. Those who know birds will recognize this behavior right away. This is a mother bird pretending to be hurt in order to draw you away from her chicks. You must have passed near the nest without knowing it, and the mother bird mistook you for a predator, and so she is making herself an easy target in order to draw you away from her vulnerable brood. It's hard to describe why Jesus went to the cross, but that comes awfully close. The love of a mother bird. Take me, not them. This is the love our Savior has for us. If you have sung the song, The 12 Days of Christmas, you probably wondered at some point what that all means, and it all has some kind of meaning associated with it. I can't help you with most of it, but I can tell you that the partridge in the pear tree is Jesus. And the partridge was chosen to represent Jesus because it is known for just this behavior, that the hen will act as bait for the predators to lure them away from the nest and to keep the chicks safe. Or perhaps you've heard some wisdom that has been passed down among poultry farmers. It's said that if you ever have a fire in your bird's nesting area, all is not necessarily lost. Find the hens, they say. If the hens are trapped in the chicken coop or wherever and it's burning and there isn't any way out, then they will gather their chicks, gather them all together under their wings, just as they were when they were still in the nest. Find the hens, the farmers say. Find their bodies. Because if the fire was not too hot, under the protection of their wings, you may find the chicks alive, saved by the very body of their mother. That is the love that led our Savior to give himself for our sake. That is the love of God that shines through Jesus in a way that even we can understand. That is the love we are to see as Jesus goes